that, let's just take a look at some of the statistics for the Big Four agenda, which is affordable housing, one of the pillars of the Big Four agenda. Now, housing the nation. The agenda is supposed to build 1 million, units planned in 5 years, 800 of which are categorized among affordable housing. 200,000 units are categorized along social housing. We also want to take a look at just some of the priority areas, and demand-driven master plan is one of them. Scaling down construction costs, scaling up developer capacity financing is also another, as well as growing mortgage financing and enhancing supportive ecosystem. But away from that, what are the concerns that are coming up? And one of them is lack of common understanding of social housing, enforcement gaps in slum upgrading, market-based approaches prevalent over social housing, as well as cost of redeveloped county houses may be out of reach for the poor, as well as limited consultation with beneficiaries. Those are just some of the concerns that are cropping up. Inappropriate pilot sites and policy vacuum may contravene interventional law. Those are just some of the issues. But now with me in studio, of course, as I had mentioned, is Professor Alfred Omenya, who is the CEO of Eco Build Africa and advisor of the Council of Governors to my far right. Thank you very much for joining us. And next to him is Pauline Vaka, the CEO of Haki Jamii. Thank you very much for making time to join us here on KTN News Desk. So I'll just start with you, Pauline. 1 million housing units in 5 years. Is this achievable?
I think the government hasn't thought through very well on how they want to execute the 1 million housing. We have a deficit that is more than 1 million, especially for the low-income earners.
Yes.
We have mushrooming informal settlements by the day, and I'm sure you agree with me, the workforce of Nairobi lives in such bad conditions. So the 1 million houses are needed, but the strategies that have been put in place is what is questionable, especially when we talk about social housing, which is supposed to house the urban poor. They talk about, having a mortgage or paying 600 to 900,000. That is the definition of what a social housing should be. And the question is affordability. How many people can afford to buy such a house? Second, the assumption is that everybody wants to buy a house in Nairobi.
Yes.
Maybe I don't want to live in Nairobi, I just want to rent and invest somewhere else.
Okay.
So rental options should be an option in this 1 million housing schemes, and the government should respond to the demand,
All right.
which is in the informal
line,
sector.
Do you think it's achievable or not?
For now, no, because the strategies are not in place yet.
Okay.
And you can see also the government now coming up with a housing fund to fund it,
right.
which is still under debate.
Right.
And even the models of financing are questionable as of now. Yes.
Prof, do you share the same sentiments? Do you think this is achievable?
Of course, it's not achievable. The government knows that is not achievable. To put things in perspective, from independence till now, government has built less than 100,000 units. So how the government intends to do, 100 times what government has done from independence,
yes,
in just 4 or 5 years is totally unrealistic. In fact, they're dreaming. And even if government had everything in place and money, it is not possible for government to deliver it. There's simply no capacity at all to deliver it. Thirdly, government does not intend to deliver this housing directly. Government is relying on third parties, basically from private sector, and government is meant to be using soft instruments, basically instruments of policy, to ensure that is done. So here is the government promising us 1 million houses that will actually be done by others, really. So it's like basically making a big promise, but relying on your neighbor
Yes.
to deliver it.
All right. The budget was just read just a week ago, and I think the affordable housing pillar was given around 6 billion shillings, 3 billion for construction of affordable social housing units, 1.5 for construction of police prison officers' houses, and of course another 1.5 for civil servants' housing schemes. This is not the first time we're seeing the government coming up with a way of relocating people to housing. What method do you think they should adopt this time round for it to work? Pauline?
I think the government should be serious when it comes to participatory approaches because, for instance, the Nyayo high-rise housing scheme was supposed to house people from the informal sector. The middle class invaded it, first because of the rental options that were given. They were so high such that somebody coming from the informal settlement cannot quickly transition to the rents that were being asked. And that's because, cost of construction is also high. But the government also needs to put into consideration what kind of options they give out there. If you force the market to buy, that might not be possible because that's what the government is thinking. And I think selling a home is much more lucrative because you get the money back to build more homes other than renting, which is spread over a number of years in terms of the capital invested. So it will be very important for the government to actually have much more concrete participatory approaches, learn the market, know what people want, not building more homes for the middle class who have so much. If you go to Kilimani areas, I think there are so many to rent houses and, along Eastlands, so many to rent. But when you go to the informal settlements, you'd hardly get an empty house because they are so packed.
Right.
So I think the government needs to learn the population and the market and respond to demand.
All right. You talked about third party.
Right.
And of course, even before we get to the building, there's so many issues facing the sector right now, from substandard goods to buildings collapsing every now and then. What policies do you think the government should adopt first before we go to the building of the 1 million housing units?
Number one, I don't really agree that government should be involved at all in construction of houses. That is not the business of government. Governments world over are very poor at constructing houses. Secondly, I don't think it is a correct use of taxpayers' money. We have a lot of challenges in this country, including housing challenges. And even if government was able to build 1 million housing, we'll be wondering on what is the criteria for one taxpayer to get benefit from these houses and the other not to. Having said that, I think government should focus on what government should be doing, and it is what you're talking about here. It is actually issues around policy. We should actually be having proper housing policies. We should, for example, if I give you a case of housing finance, for example, we talk of mortgages. What is the problem with mortgages? I mean, all banks in this country have only given 20,000 mortgages. And these mortgages have been given to people like PSS and so on. So how do you get the mortgage sector to work? And for whom?
But how many people can afford those mortgages?
That's the point. So, and then the same government in a country where you only have 20,000 mortgages comes and tells you that there'll be a mortgage scheme for the poor in Kibera for somebody earning 15,000. It is shockingly stupid. What we should be saying is that how do we enable all these players to play their role for provision of housing in the housing market? I'll give several examples. And all the examples, I mean, what government is really meant to do is to create the regulation and the policy environment to enable this to happen. Look at Zimmerman, look at Pipeline, look at Kayole. These guys are building 18 stories illegally. What is difficult for government to say, look here, we are creating plans, we are zoning areas to enable you, go and build, invest in a proper legal framework. So government must plan, government, both national and county, must create these zoning both low and middle income directors and even the mainstream market to know where to put the money in to provide the
You
housing
talked
need.
about
Yes.
the 15, someone earning 15,000.
Right.
And, you know, Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich proposed an amendment to the Employment Act
Correct.
that both employer and employee to contribute to the 0.5% of the housing, housing affordability. Do you
Housing
think,
fund.
yes, housing fund, do you think, one, this is fair to the people who are earning 15,000? Yes, the maximum they can contribute is 5K, but still that 5K is a lot to someone who is just earning 15,000.
Yeah, I think really, as I said in the beginning, the plan is not well thought out.
Okay.
Because when you come up with a housing fund and you propose changes, amendments to tax people more, yet the tax we already remit as citizens is not being used for social goods. You know, it's being used for debt repayment most of the time. If it's healthcare, you know, we are importing, we are getting grant from USAID to be able to continue with our healthcare projects. If it's water, we have grants from all over. You know, housing, now they're introducing a fund, and before you know it, you'll be told most of that has gone to recurrent, paying people to manage the fund and not to actually, you know, build houses. And then what is the criteria that will be used? You know, between me and you, who will have more priority to that housing fund for access? And when it comes to building, you know, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Now, will the government just go and build homogeneous houses and say, yes, this is what has come from the housing fund and it doesn't suit my needs?
Yes.
You know, I think it needs to be really well thought out. Taxing people more is not the answer. We need social goods, yes, but the taxes that are already there need to be put to good use. People need to have that goodwill with the government, that even if you tax me more, I know that I will be able to get certain social goods that are very primary to me. And, you know, as you go to the informal settlement now, there are no access roads, there's no water, you know, security is not that good.
Yes.
So how can the government start small? Before you go to the housing fund, you know, stone and building everything.
Yes.
Just ensure there's access to water, people have good security, you have an access road to your home and such like basic things. So creating that goodwill is very important.
All right, Prof, as she said, yes, you want to add on something?
Can I just add on to that? Look at this scenario. Already we have a mismatch in all Kenyan towns.
Yes.
About where the middle income people live and where they work. Why? Because of location issues. Where they can afford to live and where they work is actually very far. That's my first point. My second point is that if you're going to provide cheap housing for that you can actually pay a mortgage of 4,000 shillings for, we know it's not possible. But if you're going to provide it, in the case of Nairobi, you'll have to build that house in Kangundo or somewhere in Thika and those other places. The guy in Kibera is working in Kilimani. If you take him to Kagundo, you are even taking him further away from opportunities, work opportunities as it actually were. He does not need to own a house in Kangundo. In fact, ownership is none of his issue. He needs to be accommodated in affordable housing close to where they actually work. And this is why this ownership nonsense that we're pushing onto every Kenyan is part of the problem. I've got doctors, leave alone even the poor. You have a medical doctor. This guy lives in Kitengela, Kajiado, whatever it is, because that's where he's built his home. Meanwhile, the guy works in Kenyatta National Hospital.
Right.
He spends 6 hours on the road every day. That's wasted time. And government, we must think carefully that actually we need to give Kenyans safe, affordable, and accessible housing.
Yes.
But they don't necessarily need to own it. Number two, the guys who are located in good areas, like in Mathare or Kawangware or whatever, live in squalor. We need, like Pauline says, we need to ensure that basic infrastructure and services are in those areas.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's not forget that some of those people live in actually houses that are not really conducive.
Exactly.
So maybe would the government have another option of, instead of building houses from scratch, just, you know,
Renewal.
revamping the ones that they have? Pauline.
I think, yes, some counties like Mombasa County is very keen on urban renewal,
yes,
as opposed to building new homes. But it also has its challenges because remember, the people who are renting those homes are not part of the tenancy. The tenancy agreements are with people who are not even with us today. It's with completely different people. And, you know, with renewal comes different expenses. Affordability again arises.
Yes.
So will the people who are living there now in these old council estates still be able to afford the same? And you know, yesterday we were having a very good discussion around social housing and how the rental options, you know, that the county is proposing should work out. They're proposing high-rise apartments, and
yes,
I think everybody thinks that is the solution to everything. We went to Mombasa during the research we did on the social housing report, and one of the things that, you know, some of the people living in the council estates were saying is that once we have high-rise apartments, 18-story going up,
yes,
as proposed, how will we be able to have water? Because we know Mombasa has water challenges.
Yes.
So will you be carrying water up 18 stories?
Yes.
Will the county now in its urban renewal program have lifts that are serviced every day?
All right, I want you to